Welcome to Empower and Evolve, and I'm your host, Dunstan, and thanks for coming into today's episode. Now, this podcast is designed for those looking to break free from stagnation and enhance their well-being through actionable insights and inspiring stories. So you'd never miss an episode, hit that follow button and follow us through our social media accounts. Now, if you find value in our discussions, consider sharing this podcast with friends who you think might benefit listening today. Now let's get started on this journey of empowerment and transformation. Hi, Dun here, and thanks for coming back to Empower and Evolve. Now, I got a message last week from one of our listeners, and she asked me, I've started to do actions, but I can't seem to get the action stick. So, that's a thought that I had a conversation. And for today, we'd like to talk about how you can create lasting habits for your personal growth, right? And to that listener that's listening or watching today's episode, I hope I'll be able to answer your question in more context or in a better perspective. So we'll talk a little bit more about understanding how habits are really formed and a few actionable steps that you can do to help build a lasting habit. So without further ado, let's dive in. So when you talk about lasting habits, right? And this is just a thought process when you think about habits. First is it's stemming from an action. Whether it's an action to address a problem, it's an action that is towards leveling something to a better degree, right? To perhaps just building an action at the get-go, meaning just to adjust the problem right now, right here, right now, right? The present problem, not a big long-term problem. But whatever the root of the habit or the action you're doing, you always have to ask yourself, why? Why do you want to do it? Right? It could just be to impress someone. Maybe you're courting someone and you know that this person likes XYZ and you want to do the action XYZ because you just want to win the heart of this girl, right? But you're just half-hearted doing it. So, if you really want to start building a habit, the why is important. And to be honest, we could give so many reasons why we want to do things and why we don't want to do things. But if you want this action to stick and become a habit, I tell you, you have to make sure it's a compelling reason. Of course, it's not a life and death, but you yourself, you know that the reason is really, really, really important. It really matters to you. It strikes your heart that you can cry if you're not able to do it, or you're gonna have a big success out of it, right? But that why should be compelling enough. And once you've identified the why, right? Understand that when you're trying to build a habit out of an action, there's something we call the habit loop. Simply, it just comprises of three components, or it comprises of three components rather. So that's the cue, the routine, and the reward. So when you talk about the cue, it's what triggers you to do the action. Let's say, well, I'm thinking of a random idea here, a random situation. Let's say you tend to shout when you're mad, right? So the cue there is you feel that you are going to burst. Your emotions are going to burst and you're going to start screaming and shouting from the top of your lungs, right? That's a cue already. You know that you're in an argument. So if you know that it's a cue already and you know that there's an action that's in place when the cue is triggered, you can start doing the action. Next is understanding how the routine works. So you know that the component of the cue is if there's an argument, you tend to be very emotional. You tend to shout and scream and everything else in between, right? And start throwing things. So once every single instance that that cue happens, you already know that it's a trigger and you know the action that you need to do. As long as you start doing the routine, then you're executing to the action, right? You're doing the why of it, why you want to do the action, because there's a cue, and you know that this cue is not going, it's gonna trigger something bad, and I don't want that to happen. That's why I have to take this action. Now, the last component of that habit loop is the reward, and the reward can be visible as early as the first time you're doing the action. In my example, so there's an argument. It's a cue. There's an action that you need to do. So you need to calm down. You need to stop, look, and listen, right? And then calmly respond, right? And the reward there is the other person is able to explain. You can ask the question to clarify. You are able to reach a good conversation out of that potential argument that you were in your previous life. You would be screaming and shouting at the top of your lungs, right? So the reward there is you're able to go through that communication and that process better. You're able to handle your frustration, your emotions, and be objective enough to address the discussion, right? So that's the reward part. So if you know that it happened on the first time and you see how good the effect is, wouldn't that trigger you to start and continue doing the same action every time that same cue is triggered? Right? You're gonna do that. And when you start understanding and following through that habit loop now, you have to be consistent. Stick to it. Like, I don't know, better than super glue, better than rubber cement, better than rice on paper. Just fun aside. Kids, you use paper to stick cooked rice to stick paper together, but yeah. But better than super glue, better than whatever adhesive that you can think of. You have to stick to that consistent action. Normally, and before, they say it takes about 21 days to consistently do an action to build a habit. Nowadays, they'd say it's somewhere as short as 21 to as long as 66 days of continuously doing the action. Now, in that example earlier, you don't get to have an argument every day, right? So, every time you do that in one instance, that's already one time out of the, let's say, 21 or 66. But when you think about the power of consistency, the key concept here is it becomes automatic. It's already instinctive. Psychologists say it's already behavioral. It's already part of your system. That every time you know a trigger is gonna happen, a cue is gonna happen, this is already your response. And it becomes that consistent enough that you don't really need to do your stop, look, and listen and be mindful. Like really, really, like, hey, Dan, I have to calm down. There's an argument. I need to compose my thoughts. I need to stop. You don't have to go through that long process of thinking and talking to yourself, right? Because at the snap of a finger, when the cue happens, you already know what you're going to do. And that's automatic. That's already behavior. When an action is done consistently, it becomes a habit. If the habit now is absorbed and becomes automatic as part of your system of who you are right now, it's already your behavior. Right? See the level? It's not just being consistent. You have to make sure that when you build a new habit, it becomes a behavior already. Because if it's a behavior, you don't have to second guess what you're going to do when the cue or a certain cue is triggered, right? And it's not gonna be easy, right? I always tell you guys like stop, look, and listen. Stop, look, and listen. And I may sound like I don't know, an old broken record here, but being able to build that behavior and even as building a habit requires self-actualization, requires you to have a high level of self-awareness, self-consciousness of how are you acting on a certain cue, right? At first, of course, the process of going through executing the action and bridging the gap between the cue and doing the action is longer. But as you continuously do that every single time through repetition or repetitive actions, the gap starts to be shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter to the point that it's automatically. You can do that. Right? Now, when you think about that habit formation, you're going to tell me, hey Dan, it's a daunting task, right? How can I even start building that habit? I mean, I may have an action, but do I have the right action? Do I have the right approach of doing it? Do I know how to build that habit? And you need to start small. I mean, you cannot swallow the ocean unless you start drinking it cup by cup or spoonful by spoonful. So, when you want to become a better version of yourself, I remember there's a title in someone else's podcast and someone else's content. 1%. Think about that 1%. You've improved 1% of where you are yesterday. That's already an improvement. Don't expect to be 10% better today from yesterday. You can, but can you be consistent with that 10% today and another 10% tomorrow and 10% the day after? You may be running the race too fast without really understanding and letting that action sink in, become a habit, become part of your system, and becomes your behavior. Second, make sure you set the clear goals. Why do you really want to do this? Why do you want to do the action? Why do you want to do the habit? And make sure you give yourself that time frame and that checkpoint to really check, observe how you react. If you want to do a journal, be my guest. I mean, that helps for most people because it helps them clear their mind, and through that self-actualization, it's putting it on paper, and then after a few hours or a few days, they can go back and reflect on what they've written based on what the action was done and how they felt doing the action, right? And that's important. You have to increase that awareness. Third, understanding that a habit or a change of habit or a change of action to build a habit requires understanding why it was triggered in the first place, right? So, for kids, I mean, this is an anecdotal story. My partner's nephew, over lunch, was told that he's gonna be visiting the dentist next week. And you know what the kid said? Why do I have to go to the dentist? I always brush my teeth. See the response? The kid was triggered by the idea of going to the dentist. Why? Because maybe growing up, the kid was given the notion that you go to the dentist if you have a tooth problem. or your teeth are, have plaque, tartar, or cavities, right? Or you need some extraction or operation. So bottom line, there's a problem. That's why you're visiting the dentist. See the trigger and see the response. When you think about that as adults, I mean, that's a kid responding to a trigger. Imagine as adults, if we get some similar trigger, right? For those who are always been dumped, I'm a good person, I work hard, I'm honest, and so forth. Why do I always get dumped? Right? Is it because I'm not enough? Right? I mean, you could go through all of the triggers that you can think of why you got dumped. But understanding the trigger in itself um, helps you to do the right actions. Sometimes, and me growing up, no, I would put post-it notes or sticky notes or phone notifications. I mean, recently I put phone notifications like, excuse me, if I need to do the grocery every Monday, quick short grocery run every Monday. So I put that on my phone as an alarm, so that I know that by this time I should be freeing up my time or my blocking off my schedule because I have to do grocery. Because otherwise, if I'm so engrossed with what I'm doing, I may even forget doing the grocery for the whole month, right? And it's a reminder, and it's healthy and it's okay, right? Next is, as you do your action plan, of course, just like I mentioned, you do your journaling, you go back and look at it. You have to track your progress. Be in a reflective state after you do your journaling or even after the incident that triggered you to do the action. Take a quiet space, maybe 5 minutes. Go to the washroom, go to the toilet, so that you can have your alone time to observe and reflect on what have you done. And you could give yourself a pat on the back if you did something good, or maybe choke yourself to death. No, just kidding. Or you could just tell yourself, hey, you could do better than that. You can do better than that. So let's do it next time. Okay? So you talk to yourself. Hey, it's fine as long as you don't let everyone hear what you're telling yourself, right? And they might think you're like going nuts. You also have to understand that when you're doing a change, and talking about episode, I forgot the episode number, but when you go through changes, you have to find your support team, your cheerers, whether they're your friends, whether they are your family, whether they're your husband, your wife, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your son, your daughter, as long as they're your fans, right? Your supporters, your cheerers, right? They're the ones to support you. And it's not just cheering you on that you're doing the action right, but they also have a huge responsibility of not tolerating if you missed an action. They could be your hardest critics, your most difficult critics, and they will also be your number one fan. And that's fine. Take it with a grain of salt. Because, again, just like from last week's episode, understand the intent of why your supporters are doing this. And it's simply because they want to support you with your action as you build your habit. Funny, right? Just building an action and making it into a habit seems really, really easy when you think about it. But it's harder than it is, because of so many things that you have to take into consideration, so many things you have to think about. You have to be hyper conscious, especially if a cue is triggered. But life's a journey. Remember that. You may never always be winning that growth path. You will always have opportunities of learning through roadblocks, through stumble blocks, right? And it's okay. It's okay to fail. But the last thing you need to do is never give up. because you know the why you want to do it. And remember, here at Empower and Evolve, we are also your supporters. So, if you need me or anyone from my team to help cheer you on or be the difficult critic or to check on you like, hey, how's your action doing? Are you still get how do you do now when you're getting the same trigger, right? Or getting the same cue? Are you still acting like how you were before? Are you doing the plan that we've put in place when that same trigger happens? Right? We are here for you. So with that, thank you for listening to today's episode. And remember, here at Empower and Evolve, our goal is to help you become a better version of you. And with that, stay safe. Catch you next week. Take care. Bye for now. Hey buddy, thank you for joining us on this transformative journey of empowerment and growth. Now remember, it's not just about evolving. It's about embracing that incredible power within you to become the best version of yourself. Keep striving for greatness, because together, we can create a world where empowerment knows no bounds. And if you find value in today's episode, please subscribe, rate, and share this podcast with someone who could use that little inspiration. Until next time, stay empowered, stay inspired, and keep shining brightly on your path to evolution. With Empower and Evolve, you have the tools to unleash your potential and rewrite your story. Let's continue to evolve together.